Hey everyone, I'm Katie Martin. Welcome back to another episode of Create Your Character. Last episode, I started the base of the torso armor from my Destiny 2 Hunter cosplay. I ran into some problems when adding the details and layers though, so this episode I'll be figuring that out. No costume comes without problems, and solving these speed bumps is just part of the process. If you want to see how I add the details and get past these roadblocks, stick around. My first step is to make my pattern out of newspaper, and to do this I just taped a large piece of newspaper to my base that I had made already and just traced the design onto the newspaper so I could get an idea of what kind of shapes I was going to be working with and how I would go about putting these layers onto the base that I had already made. Now, keep in mind, this is like my third attempt at trying to make something that would work for these layers. I had tried at least 2 other different methods at this point, and everything else I tried did not turn out as well as I'd hoped. Now I just cut out those newspaper pattern pieces and I'm tracing them onto my foam. I'm using 4mm foam here, and there are 2 edges on the pieces that I'm going to make sure that I cut at an angle. Everything else is going to be straight up and down, but that top piece there and then the middle piece, I'm going to make sure that I cut those at an angle so I can get that really defined shape that is on the armor. Next, I'm going to seal these pieces with my heat gun. This is so that the glue and the paint that I'm going to use later on don't get soaked up totally into the foam. Next, I'm going to apply my contact cement, and as I've said before in other videos, this stuff is super toxic, so you can actually see me here in this video wearing a respirator, and you cannot see, but I also have the door open and a fan blowing outside because you want to work with this stuff in a well-ventilated area, and you definitely don't want to be breathing it in. I put on 2 coats of this stuff when I work with it. Some cosplayers swear by 3 coats, but I don't know, I've found that 2 coats is sufficient enough. 1 coat definitely doesn't do the job though. I like to go over each coat with a scrap piece of foam just to make sure that it's all layered evenly and smoothly and I don't get these clumps. That's not really a mandatory thing to do, but I like to do it when I work with this stuff, just so when I go to glue the pieces together there's not all this excess glue leaking out all over the sides. Once the pieces are dry enough, I'm going to go ahead and start putting them together. I like to just line up one end and then try and match the top, and I go super slow, even though it doesn't really look like I'm going slow in this video because the time is sped up. But yeah, this is a really slow process for me. I like to try and get it as even and matched up as possible. So I just take my time, don't get stressed out, and just kind of take it slow and steady. Here I am putting the glue down the middle 2 pieces so I can go ahead and attach the 2 sides together, and they'll be symmetrical and hopefully lay perfectly on top of the base that I have made. going to go ahead and line up the two pieces. I wanted these to be as symmetrical as possible, so I took this even slower than any other piece that I have done, and I'm lining it up again and again just to make sure, because once this stuff sticks, it's really hard to get it apart. It's not impossible, but it is pretty difficult, so I want to make sure I get it right the first time. And since I did get it right, I'm gonna go ahead and I traced before I did this, I laid the piece on top of my base and I traced the outline, so I kind of knew where to apply the glue. So I just go around the edges, and here you can see the armor has these weird side layers here, and so I didn't attach those to the main base. I wanted to put them underneath, and so I did end up tracing parts for that, but it ended up not even working, and I'll show you how I fix this later on in the video. But what you can see, what I'm applying glue to right now, that is not going to be part of the final thing. And this whole piece was kind of just me winging it, and so there was a lot that I had to retry and just do over and over again, and this was one of them. This is one of the only parts that I put in the video, though. All the other things I tried to scrap out. But yes, this whole piece was just trying different things over and over again until I finally got something that I liked. And so these are still the little side flaps that I ended up not liking, and I tore them off eventually. But yeah, I'm just applying the top piece on top of the base here to get those sweet Destiny 2 space looking layers, and I'm trying to be careful so I can get the details looking symmetrical and pretty. And see here, I already ran into problems with this, and I was trying to fix it here with my heat gun, because if you heat up contact cement, sometimes you can pull it apart, but I was not able to do it, so I ended up just ripping it off eventually and sanding it down. But yeah, I really tried to fix it here. I just hated how it looked. I thought about leaving it, but I really wanted to be happy with how this looked at the end. So once I had this attached, I went ahead and looked at my reference picture here, and I started tracing and drawing on the extra little details that are on top of this armor. And this did not have as many extra details as I thought I was going to have to add, but it did have a couple here, so I'm just going to go ahead and draw those on, kind of make a little stencil for me. These are still the side flap thingies that I did not end up going with, and you can see how lumpy and not really that smooth, sleek Destiny 2 look, so I ended up, yeah, not going with those, but I'll get to how I tore this off later. I'm drawing on the pattern for the back piece here. The back has a lot of these little details, and it's going to be covered up by a cape, but I wanted to go extra and put them on anyway, even though really nobody's going to see them, because there's going to be the cape and the quiver for this armor set, so it's really not even going to be noticed, but I'll notice it, so that's why I put them on there. Here I am taking my rotary tool and just going along and smoothing down the seams here. This is just a standard circular tip. There's a bunch of different kinds of tips you can get for a rotary tool. I usually start off with a really rough grit. I don't know exactly what it is, and I don't have the packaging, so I can't really find out, but I start off with a really rough one, and then I go over everything with a really smooth sanding tool afterwards. But yeah, this is just to kind of fix up anything that's not really smooth, and to kind of add some layering and leveling effects. I like to make some of the edges not as sharp, and you can make them totally rounded, or you can use them to make your edges even sharper actually, but it's nice to go around and make sure everything is level. This is a rounded tip, and this tip is really fine, so it's going to be really smooth and I used this for those grooves that are on the armor, and it actually turned out looking really nice, and I'm so excited to see what it looks like after I prime and paint it. Something you may have noticed as I'm sanding here is the cut that I've made on the inside of this piece. And that's because this ended up, with all the layers, it ended up being really bulky and it didn't really fit that smooth, sleek Destiny 2 design. So I tried cutting out this section in the middle here since it was just layered, and this actually made it a whole lot slimmer. So I did not record myself doing this because this was one of those things that I just tried and prayed that it worked, and it ended up working so well. There was really no method to it. I just drew where I wanted to cut, and then I made that cut and hoped that it worked. Since this tool is so much finer, I like to go along everything else that I've touched up with that rougher sanding tool, just to make sure it's all smooth. And then, since I'm extra, I like to go over everything with a sanding brick. This kind of takes out any, sometimes clumps of glue come off with the rotary tool, so this kind of just takes care of anything that's left over. And here I'm taking my X-Acto knife and I'm slicing these lines here to create this layered effect that is on the armor. I did this rather than making 3 whole layers because it seemed so much easier, and I think it looks just like the reference picture. Here you can see the actual sides of the armor that I had torn off. I didn't show myself actually tearing them off, but I used my X-Acto knife and I just cut around it and pulled them right off, and I sanded down the glue as much as possible. And then here you could see I put a piece of newspaper, drew the pattern on, and was just remaking this piece entirely. And instead of using 2mm foam like I had the first time, this is actually 4mm foam. And the cool thing about this foam is actually it is adhesive already, so you don't have to use glue for it. It has this sticker thing that you just peel off the back and you can just press it right on there. It's really cool, and I don't get to use it too often, so I was actually kind of excited to use it here, and it ended up looking so nice and it was so easy to use. I just wanted to make sure that it looked right this time, so I was really careful and I kept placing it there and holding it there to make sure it had the look that I wanted to, and I pulled it off a couple times and kept trimming it down a little bit more. But I eventually got the shape and look that I wanted here. And once I found that shape, I just peeled off the sticker and placed it down. This piece is for the back, and this is actually going to be the piece that closes the back. So it's going to be one piece that goes across the whole back part of the armor, and I'm going to use Velcro to attach it to one side and glue it to the other side, so it's kind of what holds the whole thing together. So I was lining it up and making sure that it looked all right, and I was also trying to decide which side I wanted to have the Velcro. I also had to retrace where I originally had wanted this to go. The first lines that I drew didn't really work out, so just to be safe, I traced over those lines with a different colored marker so I knew which ones to follow. Then I just heat sealed it and placed my Velcro, make sure it was exactly where I wanted it to, because once you stick this Velcro, it will not come unstuck. There's a lot of careful measuring and drawing and making sure that it was where I wanted it to be. And then, once I had traced where the Velcro was going to be placed, I took my rotary tool again and I sanded this little indentation. This was so that it would lie a little more flush with the rest of the foam and the Velcro wouldn't push it out and be as noticeable. This was me just quadruple checking that it was going to be in the right place. And now I'm applying glue to the other side that's not going to be Velcroed, so I can go ahead and stick this piece on. Once this piece is attached, it is time to place the Velcro, and this stuff is so easy to use. You just peel off the back and place it wherever you want, and once it is placed, it is kind of really hard to take off, so I like to double and triple check whenever I place it. It is also really strong. It's industrial Velcro, so it can hold up to 10 pounds, so it's great for cosplays, I have found. Alright, for these details, I am doing my same process that I've been doing throughout this entire build, and just laying down my piece of newspaper, drawing on my pattern, and then cutting out that pattern, and then I'm going to go ahead and trace that pattern onto foam. And I'm again using that adhesive backed foam for these pieces, which means I don't have to use contact cement, and I believe this is also 4mm, and these are kind of the final foam details that I have to add to this piece. After that, I'm going to go ahead and trace on these little extra details that are going to be slits in the armor. They're just little indentations to kind of add some extra depth and texture. And once I have these drawn on, I'm going to use a wood burner tool to kind of set those in. The wood burner is going to burn the foam, and it does create a smoke and a really not so pleasant smell, so I like to wear a respirator for this and still work in a well ventilated area. I'm not sure if this is toxic, but I'm guessing it's not great for your lungs, so I just try to be safe. And after that, this piece is all done. If you ever get stuck during a project like this, don't think it's the end. Every cosplayer I know goes through a trial and error process. It's frustrating and tedious when things don't go to plan, but the end result always pays off. If you've got any questions or comments, feel free to tweet me at ZTV Goofing Off with the hashtag CreateYourCharacter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Goofing Off.